This is on MSNBC pertaining to the crisis that we're facing here in America. For some reason, law enforcement, the judges, the attorneys, various departments went out of their way towards imprisoning people that never really should have been imprisoned, or if they should have been imprisoned, their imprisoned time should have been a lot shorter than what it was, because the bottom line is the whole purpose for establishing this type of system of punishing the guilty because the innocent has been violated is based around reform. It's not just based around incarcerating somebody for the rest of their lives because they got caught jaywalking. Our whole system here in America was based around reforming people. That way, once they paid their debt to society, they could get back out into society and become a productive citizen back into society. For some reason, we have missed the beat. We have gotten off course in regard to why the jail administration, regardless whether it's local, state, or federal, ever got created to begin with here in America. And that's one reason why we have over 2.3 million incarcerated people presently at the time, not counting all the people that's still on paper pertaining to people being on probation. They have turned this into some sort of a money-making industry here in America that is just about as corrupt can be, pertaining to how that they have overpopulated the prison industry with all these trivial type sentences, in which I'm not saying that all of them are trivial, because a lot of them are getting just exactly what they deserve towards life without parole. But you have to look at the bigger picture towards those who are being overly punished versus those who are being underly punished. I can speak in reference towards what has gone on in my life, that I don't personally feel like that I should have never spent one day incarcerated in jail because of the misunderstandings of the judicial system towards wanting to punish me. And the whole time I thought that our system was set up towards wanting to eradicate the evil, the demonic, the wicked, those who are worshiping under the dark forces, and the light was supposed to prosper and grow and excel. I noticed a balance that got way out of balance back years ago, especially whenever I was standing in front of a federal judge there in Paducah, Kentucky, and them trying to put a Class E felony on me because I had sworn off towards wanting to kill a darkly complected man that was evil, demonic, Satan in the carnal flesh. I felt like that our system had always, or was supposed to have been set up towards punishing the dark forces and rewarding the good forces. But for some reason, it got turned upside down. It got flip-flopped to the point that now we punish the innocent and reward the guilty. What has caused this? I'm going to tell you what has caused this. The demonic forces. Sorcery has caused this. Paranormal influences has caused this. That's what has caused this, to the point of having 2.3 million people incarcerated in 2019 here in America. Let's listen to this. I feel like that you'll gain some in-depth. Thank you.
But to get a deeper understanding of this uniquely American crisis. Mass incarceration.
As journalists, we know that, to get to the heart of something, you have to get inside it.
The men behind these bars are locked in 23 hours a day. Like my neighbor, William Curtis, a convicted murderer sentenced here to life. He told me he's tried to escape,
How far did you get?
Not very.
At the crack of dawn each morning, I set out to join the rest of Angola, riding alongside prisoners, talking with correction officers. I also sat down with Seth Smith, Director of Operations for Louisiana's prison system, who says the current system is broken.
It's not giving us the results that we want. It's costing a lot of money.
You say it's about rehabilitation, but I think a lot of Americans think it is about punishment. It should be hell.
Sure, they've done some awful things, but if it's just punishment, we can make somebody worse.
The power of rehabilitation was on the mind of nearly every prisoner I spoke to, especially with these men, who are known as juvenile lifers. They committed their crimes before they were 18 and were sentenced to life without parole.
I was 16 years old when I committed my crime.
I was 17 years old.
Most of them are here for murder, but they say they are changed men.
We were children when we got incarcerated.
But the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2012 that mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles are unconstitutional. So today, they all have a chance at parole.
When we do get the opportunity to show that we are different, the people will be able to see.
Back in the solitude of my cell, I would reflect on the day.
I've personally wrestled with this question of, is prison punishment? Is it a place of reform? It's all very complicated.
We often think of prisons in the abstract. Criminals are sent here, and that's the end of their story. It's not, of course. Knowing that each of their stories continues behind and beyond these walls. Maybe that's the key in helping us solve this American crisis.
And Lester Holt joins me now. Lester, extraordinary insights. You raised so many profound questions about rehabilitation and punishment and the balance, and especially for these juvenile lifers.
Yeah, I mean, these are the issues that our country's struggling with right now. I mean, we've seen criminal justice reform has taken on a bipartisan support. We saw the federal First Step Act that was passed, of course. That only dealt with federal prisoners, but there is a conversation going on right now. How far do you go? It's one thing to reduce the prison population of nonviolent offenders, but how much of a risk do you take on some of the men that I met here who are violent offenders? They claim they've changed. In some cases, they committed their crimes as teenagers. They're now men in their 40s and 50s and 60s. Do they deserve to continue behind bars? How do we factor in the rights of victims and family members who have lost people to these men? It's very complicated, but it is stirring a national conversation.
You've done so much work on this whole issue. Meek Mill, your interviews, the Central Park Five. What did you learn in addition by being inside Angola?
I think I learned about this power of rehabilitation. We hear that word a lot, and we often look at prisoners and they're kind of invisible to us, but when you meet them on an individual basis, you hear about the crimes they committed, and at first you're horrified, but then you find yourself having these really intelligent conversations and very thoughtful and deep conversations. Now, obviously, they've been forced into a position they have to reckon with their crime and their future, and as I have noted in reporting this story, you never know when someone is conning you. I mean, sometimes people tell you what they think you want to hear, but there is something real and something valid about this sense of wanting to start over and feeling that, boy, on the outside, maybe I could make a difference now, knowing what I know, having experienced what I've experienced.
And how unusual is what's happening in Angola, Louisiana reforms, where everyone has a job, where they are actually learning something, whether they're going to get out or not?
Yeah, it's not happening in all places, and that's one of the issues in criminal justice reform. It's so uneven as to how various corrections agencies are handling this, but they have found great success there. And it's funny, talking to the corrections officers, they were, to a person, they said, we don't like the idea of no possibility of parole. It makes us all in a more dangerous way, because if you take away hope, you've also made the place in many ways less severe. There's the thought of what does a person have to lose. So they're mostly supportive of the idea that they should be given some chance at parole, but that's again a larger question in criminal justice.
Well, I know you're going to be exploring all of this, continuing. Lester Holt, thank you so much. Chris will see more of the Justice for All series tonight on NBC Nightly News, and also tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on NBC, a special edition of Dateline to see more of Lester's reporting from Angola prison. And then this Sunday, an MSNBC special. Lester holds a Justice for All town hall at Sing Sing Correctional Facility. Watch it here, right here on MSNBC, Sunday at 10 Eastern.
I can't speak for others. I can only speak of myself. But in 2007, whenever I was evaluated by the West Kentucky judicial system up in Four Rivers Behavior Center there in Murray, Kentucky, that put me on their radar based around my biological father calling them up whenever he had found out that I was leaving Florida and going back up to land between the lakes up in Kentucky, western Kentucky, towards doing another 40-day, 40-night fast for God the Father to sanctify another sword, because the first one had been taken from me by the United States Homeland Security government down in Madison County in Jackson, Tennessee in 1989. Realizing the severity of the hanging chads in the Florida region, topped off by all the other problems that we was soon to be facing, I knew that it was time to go back to the altar and pray for a mighty revival, for a revolution. Of course, I got stopped by the Kentucky authorities there in 2007. Me traveling around, being a storm chaser, going from city to city, from catastrophe to catastrophe, going from state to state, kept this up for quite some times until 2009, after the occurrences took place in my life out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Was working in Kennesaw, Georgia, whenever at a facility, a body shop facility there in Kennesaw, Georgia, right out of Atlanta. Whenever the people that I was working for, it was a big body shop that flew from Chicago, Illinois, Gerber Collision and Glass, just to have me fired because there was a bogus warrant that was placed upon my life by a Lieutenant Burns in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, that I had threatened his life, and the feds was putting this out like it was an actual terrorist threat, simply because I was in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, digging around towards finding out the truth about what actually happened in 1995 of the Nichols and Timothy McVeigh, Oklahoma, homegrown worst catastrophe that has ever hit the United States of America. Whenever I realized that the heat was on me of me losing my job, I wound up leaving and going down to Jacksonville, Florida, and got a job. But within 2 weeks, Secret Service had found out where I was, and they went to my workplace and caused such of a disturbance that I lost my job. By that time, I left Jacksonville, Florida, went back to the Atlanta region, going to Douglasville, worked approximately for 3 or 4 weeks. By this time, January had come, and I felt an urgency to go back to Kentucky once more to try to not only make amends, but also to complete the course of the sword symbolizing peace on earth. That's whenever the Kentucky authorities found out that I was back into the region after me purchasing a primitive backpack camping year seasonable ticket. Within 30 minutes, I was rearrested, this time by the LBL authorities, and taken to Paducah, Kentucky for an arraignment. It was there whenever a Mr. Woodall, no, Wergersfrick, I can't remember the prosecutor's name, that come out of Lexington, Kentucky to represent me, that basically poked me back in the corner and said, this is the way the cow is going to eat the cabbage. I go, okay, how's the cow going to eat the cabbage? He said, we can put a Class E felony on your life because you have sworn off on record talking and leaving messages with the LBL officials that you was going to attempt to try to dismantle or eliminate the axis of evil pertaining to Satan, which is now walking around in the fleshly sense of being a foreigner figure, Arabic in descent, that we can place a E felony onto your life because of these threats, or you can agree to go get an eval done. So I agreed to the terms and left Paducah, Kentucky, and wound up in MCC in downtown Chicago, being studied like a laboratory rat for approximately 4.5 months. Whenever I come back to Paducah, Kentucky, the federal judge was amazed. He actually patted me on the back and told me what kind of good job that I had done towards not only getting along with the doctors and the staff, but getting along with the inmates. He acted like he was fiberglassed to the point of congratulating me for doing such of a good job. While being out on the road once more, being a catastrophe chaser, a storm chaser, because that was basically the only way that I knew to be able to make a living for myself, was to travel from catastrophe to catastrophe, from city to city, from town to town, to state to state. When I had reached the period of being out in California in October of 2011, realizing that not only the San Diego federal officials identified who I was whenever I was up in their state capital, but also within a week wound up losing my job and my apartment out in California, being an auto body technician. That's whenever I realized I'm going to have to straighten this out some way or another towards going back to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, hiring an attorney and trying to get these charges dropped, which wasn't but a misdemeanor, a state misdemeanor, but they was still handling it like it was some sort of a federal case. So sure enough, I get back to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and I got lucky by finding a job at Collision Clinic there in the city limits of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, working right beside Chesapeake and Devon oil companies, doing a lot of their work for them in that region, and hired an attorney and maintained a proceedings towards getting it resolved with the Oklahoma authorities, hiring an attorney by the name of Jay Silvernail. We wound up having to go to the prosecuting attorney, the judicial system there in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, for a period of about 6 or 7 different times before we convinced them that I was not going to agree to a crime of confessing of guilt simply because they wanted me to, and simply because they was going to try to butter me up or try to brainwash me in the fact that if I admitted to guilt, I would not have to spend not one legal day incarcerated in jail. Okay? In jail. I would not agree to those terms. And because of it, it was a long, lengthy, drawn-out thing. You know, if I was still living in Tennessee at that time and working in Tennessee and having to drive back and forth to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, every time there was a court appearance, I'm pretty sure that I would have got disgusted and eventually I would have gave in to their terms. But because I was smart enough to get temporary housing at that time in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, living in a extended stay where you pay like $800 every month or $900 every month, including your water, electricity, and your bed linens, clean bed linens once a week, etc., and towels. Basically, that's how I survived. I lived that way. So eventually, they dropped the charges. Well, as soon as they dropped the charges, I felt like that a lot of this BS was in behind me. So I went ahead and rented out a house, not an apartment, but a house. A 3-bedroom house with a nice garage, had a pool table in it, even had a dog, had a screened-in backyard. And of course in Oklahoma, because the renters was so bad, you had to pay a month before and a month after, plus the month that you're actually renting. So you actually got to come up with 3 months rent just to be able to rent out an apartment or a house in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, or in the state of Oklahoma. I don't know if it's that way statewide, but anyways, I had to shell out about $2,200 just to get a house. In the meantime, I make a telephone call back to Land Between the Lakes right shortly after the courts had released the charges in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, to Land Between the Lakes Federal Administration Office, telling them that I was sorry for the confusion, but that my story was going to be eventually told pertaining to how that they illegitimately handled me in 2007, 2008, and in 2009, leading into where I was now. After that I had finally got moved into my house within about 10 days, I made another telephone call, this time to a Gary Hawkins that worked for the Forestry Department in Land Between the Lakes. I did not call Land Between the Lakes Federal Office. This time I made a direct telephone call to Gary Hawkins, the very people that was engaged in harassing me, taunting me, and trying to make things that much more harder while I was up in that area fasting and praying for a revival and praying for a revolution. Now I've made 2 telephone calls in the span of about a 90-day period. They, because it's a federal forestry up there, or it was at the time, put out a federal warrant pertaining to telephone stalking that carries the charges, according to their federal books, of 1 to 5 years. So now they've got 2 accounts. They put out a warrant for my arrest. They get the TVI here in Weakley County all concerned about where is Mr. Jackson. They even come to my brother's house asking him where I was, and David told him he's out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They arrested me. Their Oklahoma authorities arrested me because they was keeping a close watch on me. They knew exactly where that I was because they had already been to my shop and investigated my tools and my equipment and my automobile, keeping a thorough watch on me. In the meantime, I get arrested. I get hauled into the Oklahoma jail system. Within 10 days, they had to pick me up, in which they did. They hauled me halfway around the world just to get to Hopkinsville Christian County Jail, and there's where I remained for 9.5 months, being forced by Judge Woodall in Trigg County in Cadiz, Kentucky, of going and getting a third evaluation done that costed me 9.5 months of being incarcerated over 2 non-threatening apologetic telephone calls. Yes, we have a crisis here in America pertaining to law enforcement, the judicial systems that wants to pick on the innocent and basically let the guilty run free. I had to say this in regard to this program that is now coming out, engaging, pertaining to the crisisness that is going on here in the USA. Once more, thank you for listening. God bless and good luck to all of us here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. Thanks.